We are delighted and honored to have FCC Commissioner Meredith Attwell Baker. The details of her bio are in the packet we have, but I think it's just so great to have her on the commission, because I say this with all due love and respect. She's really one of us. She's been in the business for those of us who have been around a long time. She's been through the wars. She's been in the trenches. And I think that it is so wonderful to have somebody with that kind of experience and industry knowledge on the commission. It's an absolutely phenomenal pick by President Obama, and we are delighted that she's here, and we welcome you. And so without further ado, Commissioner Baker.
Let's see. Well, hello everybody, and good morning. Thanks, Larry. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning, because the Phoenix Center is really one of the most significant institutions in Washington that really does seek to keep the facts in the debate about telecom policy. It's shocking. Or I think actually, in the Phoenix Center's own words, they try to avoid political hyperbole and instead approach public policy with the analytical rigor it deserves. And so that is even all the more important today. So given the FCC's particular clear focus on data-driven and being a data-driven, transparent agency, it is important for both industries and institutions to really participate actively in the debate to ensure that we have a full record. The rebuttals, for instance, of the Berkman study that the Phoenix Center did are surely a good example of the role that you can play. And so I really look forward to the Phoenix Center's work and our work together as we move forward towards our policies. As we all know, the Commission has a really full agenda for 2010. At the outset, it may be helpful to understand how I approach the challenges to the decisions we're going to have to make. I fundamentally believe that consumers will benefit most from continued investment, innovation, and competition. I start with the assumption that markets work better than government intervention, and that competition regulates market behavior more efficiently than regulators can. This is my regulatory philosophy that will guide me as the Commission begins a consideration of the National Broadband Plan and our other front-burner issues. It is my hope that come February, the FCC will have a plan that charts a meaningful course for our nation's broadband future. I want to recognize the Commission's broadband team. Congress presented the Commission with a formidable challenge. 30 field hearings and over 25, or maybe today it's 26, 27 public notices later, innumerable all-nighters, and truly lots of gray hairs. I do think that Blair and his team have done a great job at gathering data from all parts of the ecosystem. And I really commend the industries and the interest groups and the trade associations for offering really valuable input to each stage of this process. I look forward, with a little hesitancy and a little scared, but I look forward to hearing from the broadband team in the next couple of weeks as they put the plan together. However thoughtful the National Broadband Plan may be, it will be far from self-executing. It is my hope that the plan will not only propose paths forward, but will also start us down a dialogue on some very difficult issues that have really vexed the FCC for decades. I'm talking about intercarrier compensation, universal service, special access, and spectrum policy. It's my sense that my colleagues and I are going to have to take a tough look at each of these issues if we are going to craft policies that enable a broadband future for Americans in all parts of our country. Today, I want to focus on just one of those issues that may be addressed, and it's particularly important to the long-term broadband health of our country, to our global competitiveness, and to me personally, and that's spectrum policy. The United States needs a comprehensive approach that expands upon proven, flexible, market-oriented policies that facilitate spectrum access, wireless innovation, and competition. Our policy should achieve two overarching objectives. The first is to make better use of the spectrum that is available today, and the second is to get as much additional spectrum into the market as possible to meet the current and future demands of wireless consumers. This approach must include the nation's first cross-governmental, long-term strategic framework. This is my top priority and my focus for today. The framework should be one of our major efforts of 2010 and should chart the government's course well into the decade. And we should pledge to make this a living document, one that adapts over time and gives the public a clear sense of the policy direction of the government and a timeline for additional spectrum availability to the extent possible. My hope is the first part of such a framework is a comprehensive inventory of how government and industry use spectrum today. For those of you who know me, my focus is not surprising. It's hard really for me to believe, but I have spent nearly 15 years in government and industry working on these issues. Throughout that time, whether at CTIA, and I joined before the I stood for Internet, at co-ed communications or in private practice, I participated in the unprecedented growth of the communications industry, in unleashing the power of innovation and investment, and in creating strong, viable competition to benefit America's consumers. I saw some businesses succeed and some fail. I saw great value delivered to consumers, and I saw some ill-advised governmental policies turn into industry arbitrage. Later at the Commerce Department, I saw the positive impact U.S. leadership on technology policy to promote an open internet and opportunities for U.S. businesses and technologies here and abroad. I participated in efforts to foster investment in wired and wireless services, lower barriers to entry across industries, create more flexible service rules, and get new spectrum into the hands of businesses ready to provide valuable consumer services. We worked to ensure that market forces were the driving force behind putting spectrum to its highest and best use through auctions rather than command and control service rules. Overall, we helped to triple the amount of spectrum, both licensed and unlicensed, that is now available for the wireless broadband services that consumers use today. These collective efforts of government and industry have provided us a strong foundation to build a mobile broadband future. I also know that we need to do more. In just a few short years, access to the internet has become a critical factor in the lives of most Americans. We need to ensure that every American can access the internet by the most affordable and convenient means possible. Encouragingly, there are signs that mobile devices, smartphones, and increasingly netbooks are empowering people, particularly older Americans, lower-income households, and other unserved communities, to go online for the first time. The Pew Foundation recently released a report that noted the power of mobile broadband to encourage people who had never used the internet before to go online. Organizations like One Economy have recognized this trend, and in conjunction with the mobile industry are developing broadband adoption and literacy training programs to make the internet relevant and accessible to every American. It's wonderful that more people are getting exposure to the power of mobile broadband and are putting it to such good use. The statistics really help put this sea change into perspective. Information recently filed with the Commission suggests that less than 15% of Americans go online today with mobile broadband. However, in the key 18 to 29-year-old demographic, 93% use mobile broadband. I'm confident that wireless internet access will soon be the norm across all demographic groups. In this room, we all know the attraction of the mobile web. My guess is that at least 50% of you will check your smartphones during this talk to see about the latest on Tiger Woods. It's okay. These global trends are not going away. Smartphones capable of accessing the internet may soon outsell regular mobile phones, and there's a fairly broad consensus that within 10 years, the principal global means of access to the internet will be through a wireless device. Predictions like this, and the testimony of countless CTOs and other industry leaders, tell a similar story. We expect 130% annual growth for mobile data services over the next 5 years. For mobile broadband to reach its full potential, we are going to need more spectrum. Lots more. Not today, and not even tomorrow, but soon. To meet the rising demand for wireless broadband and address other core Commission objectives, it has become very clear to me that we must have a central focus on spectrum policy. Given wireless broadband's ability to foster new competitive players, drive economic investment, and push broadband services to underserved communities, I have no doubt that the National Broadband Plan will address this country's spectrum needs at some length. This is both appropriate and promising. But I do want to make sure that long-term spectrum reform is not just a subset of broadband reform. The Commission should develop a separate, complementary approach to guide the nation's spectrum policy into the next decade. Do not worry, I am not suggesting 15 more workshops or 20 more comment cycles, but I am proposing a more comprehensive and searching review of our nation's spectrum management policies. Today, there are over 500 megahertz of spectrum available for flexible licensed commercial wireless services. By various estimates, this demand will require hundreds more megahertz of additional spectrum to meet the anticipated needs of a truly mobilized America, where 270 million plus Americans are going online wirelessly for their healthcare, their education, their entertainment, and employment. This need for new spectrum will not develop overnight, and industry isn't sitting still waiting for all this to happen. Wireless service providers will be bringing 3G and 4G services online during the coming months in the 700 megahertz, the AWS, and EBS-BRS bands. Even where systems are already in place, carriers continue to innovate to use these bands more efficiently by deploying new spectrally efficient technologies like LTE and WiMAX. Providers are also adding infrastructure and advanced technologies that allow for cell splitting, increasing use of femtocells, and deploying smart antennas to increase throughput. Innovation is also ongoing to blend wired, unlicensed, and licensed solutions to more efficiently manage spectrum and network resources. This continued investment and innovation by providers to use spectrum efficiently is a positive trend, but industry alone cannot solve our long-term spectrum challenges. Additional spectrum will be necessary for the future. Even with the agreement of every interested stakeholder, it takes a long time for government to bring new spectrum to the market. In the past, it has also often taken 6 to 13 years to make spectrum available to commercial users through traditional reallocation and relocation approaches. I am hopeful that the future reallocations will take less time, thanks to lessons learned in these past efforts, to the Commercial Spectrum Enhancement Act, and to the helpful recommendations of the Commerce Department Spectrum Management Advisory Committee. Nonetheless, the timing and the intricacies of spectrum reallocation processes, along with the need for a fresh approach, drive my interest in having the Commission begin work in coordination with other government agencies to address the nation's spectrum needs. In my mind, this undertaking should include at least 3 core elements. First, an up-to-date strategic spectrum management framework that includes achievable and clear short and longer-term goals. A transparent plan will provide a predictable flow of spectrum resources to broadband providers to allow planning both by existing providers and new entrants, as well as more flexible use of existing allocations. Second, economic and regulatory policies to facilitate investment in mobile broadband networks, including deploying 4G networks and enhancing 3G infrastructures. These policies need to support the continued success of the competitive wireless market, but not to the exclusion of entrepreneurs and new entrants. We also need to align the incentives to deploy wireless services to unserved and underserved areas. Third, a policy plan to actively promote innovation, including cutting-edge research and development in areas that will help increase the efficiency of spectrum use. Mobile broadband wouldn't exist today without the basic research conducted years ago and relentless applied research and development. We cannot expect to benefit from the types of advances that took us from brick phones to smartphones without a comprehensive commitment to world-class research and development in the areas of mobile technologies here in the United States. This could include enhanced collaboration with technical advisors or other spectrum experts and the adoption of policies that foster further innovation. While over the next few months I plan to share additional thoughts on addressing spectrum challenges, today I wanted to talk about the broad contours of what should be the Commission's first step, the development of a comprehensive and strategic spectrum management framework. We need to look at what we can do and must do today to address the spectrum needs of tomorrow. In 2003, President Bush established the Spectrum Policy Initiative, and we developed a strategic spectrum plan for government while I was at NTIA. I think it is essential that we get started with one for non-federal users today. This would not be the first time the Commission tried to look at spectrum policy holistically. Chairman Powell's Spectrum Policy Task Force report and recommendations were thoughtful and instructive, but it was also before netbooks, BlackBerries, iPhones, and Droids. We need to take a fresh look and build on these prior efforts. It's Strategy 101 that one needs to understand the contours of a problem before one can make any recommendations or develop a plan. Indeed, my analytical framework for resolving spectrum issues or any other challenge before the Commission is to first identify the objective and then to look at the statute and to Congress, consider the context, and to weigh the costs and the benefits. With respect to spectrum, we don't today have the basic tools necessary to discern a proper objective with respect to spectrum usage and needs. We need tools to know how, when and where commercial, public safety, and public sector uses spectrum. One critical tool government and industry needs is a spectrum inventory to build a better understanding how spectrum is being used today across all bands. Such an inventory should be dynamic and focused on data that will inform and facilitate additional spectrum use. The output should be a user-friendly resource for all interested parties and should be able to be incorporated into more sophisticated spectrum management tools. Such an inventory will be critical to government efforts to manage spectrum more effectively, as well as spectrum users trying to find fallow spectrum that can be transformed into greater connectivity and new services. I'm reminded of Matt Rantanen, who's the Director of Technology of the Southern California Tribal Digital Village. He was a witness at our spectrum hearing in October in San Diego. Matt told us kind of lightheartedly about the trouble that he had adding capacity to his wireless network that serves Native American communities. Many of his initial spectrum solutions were dead ends because of competing uses and exclusionary areas that would have been readily apparent in an inventory-driven database. Without an inventory that shows where spectrum opportunities may lie and where there are no-go zones, the FCC cannot expect people to build business plans and spectrum sharing models that are going to help meet the spectrum needs of consumers. We want to lower transaction costs and barriers to entry for those who want to build infrastructure and provide service. An inventory tool could help bring together buyers and sellers, lessors and lessees, and those who might share infrastructure to the benefit of consumers. I know there's recognition of a need of an inventory in Congress, but I don't think that the FCC or NTIA needs any congressional authorization to carry out a spectrum inventory, and I hope we can get started soon. Even without an inventory, we know from rural and national broadband proceedings that a lot of allocated and licensed commercial spectrum in rural areas has not been deployed. The dynamic inventory I envision will likely highlight other places where deployment lags as well. To address this uneven deployment problem, we need to take a comprehensive look at our secondary market rules. Initially developed to encourage deployments in unserved and underserved areas, the secondary market rules have been an evolving tool for providers that may not be attracting the level of investment initially envisioned. The FCC needs to take another look. We need to ask what the Commission can do to stimulate secondary market transactions and that enhance the efficient use of existing spectrum allocations. To answer that question, we need to develop a better understanding of the economic forces that affect the robustness of a secondary market. It is worth noting that there are entrepreneurs out there who are trying to start businesses in trade spectrum, but it's my sense that they may be struggling, and I think we need to know why. Are transaction costs too high even after an inventory? Is there sufficient transparency in our existing license database? Are there enough participants to make a market? What specific steps can the FCC take to drive transaction and information costs down and to increase the number of potential secondary market participants? We also need to understand the impact of our service rules, especially the build-out rules and other performance requirements on the secondary market. Could they be modified to provide incentives that would encourage additional deployments? Within this discussion, what is the potential role of spectrum leasing? Is interference trading a concept that we could help improve spectrum policy? Are there policies that would encourage dynamic spectrum access and cognitive radio technologies and other inventive tools that are yet to be developed, which I believe are going to play a very significant role in the near future in enhancing spectrum efficiency? The more the FCC can promote an active and dynamic secondary market for spectrum, the better off we will be in meeting the challenges of using spectrum we have more efficiently and in helping ensure broadband coverage to all Americans, especially in unserved and underserved areas. So as we develop a more comprehensive understanding of spectrum use, I think we also need to rationalize and update our existing spectrum allocations and service rules. Decades-old, service-specific and technology-specific allocations have splintered our spectrum, delayed implementation of tremendous innovation, and arguably resulted in inefficiencies. Resolving those inefficiencies could be one of the keys to unlocking additional value in our current spectrum allocations. In this context, it is worth noting that the initial cellular licenses contained none of the rigidity of mobile licenses in other parts of the world, notably in Europe. As a result, there was significant innovation and investment that has propelled U.S. networks from analog to digital and from digital to 3G and now 4G technologies. By contrast, bands subject to much more rigid service rules, including the fixed microwave and the LMR, have remained largely the same technologically, perhaps because the rules may not have facilitated investment and innovation in the same manner as flexible allocations. On a related matter, as we move towards more market-driven service rules, we should avoid rules that favor specific business models. If the market and investors will support a unique or innovative business model, that's great, and the FCC needs to make sure there are no regulatory barriers to them. But I do not think that the Commission should be prejudging those outcomes, however high-minded the purposes might be for such efforts. So in conclusion, I think it's important to recognize that these important first organizational steps to rationalize our spectrum policies will not fix the nation's spectrum challenges. Longer term, I see no choice but to identify other spectrum that can be used for mobile broadband services, both above and below 3 gigahertz. Before we reach these difficult conclusions, the spectrum management framework outlined today is a critical first step. By taking full stock of our spectrum resources and how they are being used and adapting secondary market and service rules to the changed conditions and technologies we have today, I think we can make great strides to help ensure that the U.S. consumers are the beneficiaries of a world-class mobile broadband infrastructure. In closing, with the crush of broadband and other high-priority issues, I want to ensure that long-term spectrum management gets the full attention it deserves. It is my hope that the Commission will act quickly and no later than the end of 2010 to adopt a strategic spectrum management framework. Thank you.
The Commissioner has some time for questions, so George has got the handheld, so questions for the Commissioner? All right, George, go.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Let me hold this down so I don't blast everyone away. My name is Kerry Hinton. I'm Policy Advisor to the Chairman of the D.C. Public Service Commission. And one of the issues that the states have had that brought to the FCC that still is, shall we say, on your table prior to your arrival, no disparagement, that seems to be fundamental to being able to implement the recommendations that come from the National Broadband Team is, what is broadband services? Are they data services? Are they telecommunication services? Are they something else? And thus, the regulatory treatment thereafter.
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that's one of the issues that the broadband team is going to look at, and the broadband plan will look at. In addition to what you didn't ask is what speed is broadband, and I think that's an important question that we're going to address too. Not necessarily in the context of a goal, but in the context of, it's pretty clear that broadband has become critical infrastructure. And so as more government sources, more government services run on broadband, whether it's energy or education or health and human service type information, as more of that goes on broadband, we need to make sure all Americans have access to it. Thus, it's pretty clear that the broadband plan will make you have a goal of setting universal service encompassing broadband. So those things need to be defined within the context of the broadband plan so that we can look at reform on universal service to make sure all Americans have access to broadband.
Can I follow up?
Mm-hmm.
Is it on? Okay. Just to follow up, I believe it was notice number 19 that was recently issued, which addressed universal service reform. And there seems to be an underlying tenet, shall we say, that particularly for ILECs, maybe even so for CLECs, that there needs to be a transition for use of the Universal Service Fund from provision of voice services to support for broadband services. And of course, many of the states, and my own included, our hybrid form here in the district, have supported utilizing, particularly for Lifeline service, for provision, Lifeline funding for provision of broadband services. Is that an accurate assumption that there's a leaning towards the FCC towards utilizing the universal service funding to a greater degree than in the past for supporting broadband services? And then the corollary of that then is, what are the public service obligations of broadband services as the quid pro quo of receiving such type of funding? For example, provision of E911 services and so on.
Well, I think you're asking really critical questions that if we had all the answers to, our work would already be done. Unfortunately, we have a long way to go down that road. I would say from the conversations that I've had with fellow commissioners and from looking at the record that we have before, it's clear that everyone wants broadband to be included into universal service reform. You can't just add it. You have to reform the whole, I think what's next quarter is going to be 14% is our universal service number. So, how high are consumers really willing to go on that, and how high are regulators willing to go on that? I think we may be laughing. I mean, talking to y'all a year from now, you're going to be throwing things at me, but I think we may be at this tipping point where even after a decade of trying to reform universal service, both with broadband becoming really critical infrastructure and with the contribution rate being so high, that we really are at a point where we're going to have to address all these issues and reform universal service, so that, there's certainly be some sort of glide path where, voice services has been are very important, obviously, but broadband services are important too. How are we going to balance that, and how are we going to move forward? I think those will be the questions that we'll be working on for the rest of 2010.
Sure.
We were having dinner talking about this over dinner. We figured we'd ask the expert.
Yeah. What do you see is the problem with secondary markets today? What are the main reasons that we don't see more activity in secondary markets?
Well, I think I outlined, we're asking all those questions. It's imperative that we have one, I think, so that we can more effectively utilize the spectrum. We've been asking those same critical questions. I think part of it is that the database that the FCC currently has. Spectrum Bridge has done some amazing things using the information and transforming it to be very consumer-friendly, but I just don't think our database is sufficient to enable the secondary market as it exists right now.
You think it's primarily database issue?
No, I think there's some other rules that we're going to have to look at reforming, some other ways to incentivize secondary markets.
Commissioner, thank you again so much for coming. Thank you. Your busy schedule.
All right.